Well, welcome everyone. I think you've probably already been welcomed, but if you don't know, I'm Rebecca Mcnroy with KUT. This is Dr. Art Markman and Dr. Bob Duke, also known as Two Guys on Your Head. So we're very excited to be here this evening to speak to you all not only about the importance of libraries, but about the importance of these places of discovery. So as we begin our conversation, I'd like to start with a quote from Ray Bradbury. Anyone? Maybe a
I don't
couple
think he's
people know.
here.
No, not yet. He and I have the same eyeglasses when I wear them, so I feel a
It's better than
connection.
glass
Okay,
eyes.
that's cool.
It's true. So Ray Bradbury said, "I discovered me in the library. I went to find me in the library," which I think is really a wonderful way to open up a discussion about what libraries are for. Like, what is the importance of having a library? And so when we were asked to talk tonight, we wanted to talk about not only the psychology of these spaces where we can discover all of these different ideas, but also discover parts of ourselves which we didn't know existed. So as an entry point, let's talk a little bit about, the psychology of the library.
So one thing I want to say about this is, back in the day when people read, books, physical books.
You do.
I do. But one of the great things about physical books is that they have to be stored somewhere, right? And so if you gather a bunch of them together and you put them in one place and then you allow people to borrow them, you call it a library. One of the beautiful things about a physical space like that is that it creates these opportunities for serendipity that don't exist in much of the online world. One of the things I've noticed, right, is if you try to buy something like on Amazon, it's very hard to just stumble on something because they're going to show you other stuff that other people might have liked if they read this, and that's fine. I mean, every once in a while you find that you discover that you're sort of like all these other people. But what was always beautiful about the library was this opportunity to you'd be glancing at the shelves and some title would strike you and you'd pull it out and then you go, no, that's not it. But then the one next to it turned out to be really interesting and you'd read that and suddenly you had discovered this book that nobody else had read. And libraries create those opportunities in ways that can't really be duplicated effectively in the electronic world.
And I just like to add a comment in praise of inefficiency. This is, we live in a time right now where efficiency seems like that's the thing. Everybody's trying to get stuff done quickly and with no waste, and things that used to be sort of accepted as the natural course of action have now become seen as wasteful often. And I think, if you talk to people who are creative in really any domain of human activity, whether you talk about people who have solved a particular problem in mathematics or an engineer who's solved a particular problem or a writer who's written something that's interesting, there's not a lot of efficiency in that. There's a lot of wandering around and going up blind alleys that you find out, well, boy, that didn't really pan out. I need to sort of change course here. And Art and I, who work with many lovely graduate students who want to be more efficient, and their expectation is, because we're old, is that we will help them to be more efficient because we already know the path. And we can just tell them, just go there, and then you'll figure this out. Except they're frustrated by us because we won't tell them that, because it's not true, right? The reason we understand what we understand, the reason all of us in this room understand what we understand, is not because of the things we've done correctly. It's because of the errors we've made. It's because of the mistakes that we've made. It's because of the blind alleys that we pursued and then discovered that something that we were looking for wasn't actually there. But as Art was saying a minute ago, we often find things that we didn't even know we were looking for. I love that Ray Bradbury quote, by the way. Yeah. But I think, especially at a time right now, I look at a library now and you look through what is now a modern library. I mean, not only this wonderful facility here, but Mr. Weeks' facility down on the lake. I mean, those are remarkable places, and there are technological things everywhere, right? But what really I think people underestimate is the extent to which having spaces where people and artifacts of the human condition sort of wander around together is a tremendously precious resource.
Yeah, and I want to jump on this inefficiency thing. I'm
Go.
a big fan of inefficiency. and one of the reasons for it is because if you look at the history of creative invention, what you discover is that most of these inventions involved people finding something they knew about that turned out to be relevant for some problem that they're trying to solve. So I did this book a few years ago called Smart Thinking. The book starts out by talking about James Dyson and the Dyson vacuum. And the deal in the Dyson vacuum is Dyson wanted to get rid of the bag in the vacuum cleaner, and he wanted to find a way to do a vacuum without a bag. And he happened to just know a lot about a lot of stuff. And one of the things that he knew about was the sawmill. And he basically drew a parallel between the industrial cyclone that takes that sucks all this that helps to separate the sawdust from the air that they suck out of the sawmill. He drew a parallel between that and the way that you might separate the dirt and the air that comes into a home vacuum cleaner, and as a result of doing that, created a company that generates hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenues. And at the time that he learned about sawmills and industrial cyclones, he wasn't thinking to himself, well, that's it. That's the $400 million idea. He just learned about it. And then later on, it turned out to be a valuable piece of information to have. And the problem is, and this to get back to what Bob was saying, you know, what most people want is efficiency. They just want to know, what do I need to know? You know, tell me the thing I need to know, and then once I know that, that'll be the thing that makes me creative. And the problem is, you're not going to know what you needed to know until later, right? When you look back on it, you'll be, wow, it's a good thing I knew that. And that's the problem with the recommendation engines that you get from Amazon, is that if you just read the stuff that everybody else who read what you just read also read, then everyone knows the same stuff. Right? So if you don't stumble on some random thing and read it, you won't have that extra bit of knowledge that nobody else had that allows you to solve this problem, which you wouldn't know that you needed until after you needed it. Right?
And did you?
I did. I was going to say something.
Okay.
Because, you know, the thing is, that reminds me, I mean, I was just having a conversation with someone at the reference desk earlier, this wonderful woman who helped me print out these quotes this evening. And she said, and I said, you know, what do you think is important about the libraries? And she said, well, I'm just an undergrad, but what I think is really important is, like, there are all these conversations people are having about things, and you don't know what fits into what. You know, you don't know what the conversations that came before that are. You know, you might be having a conversation about engineering, and you're a literary or literature major, and you don't really know how these things are fitting together. You know, so and we recorded a show earlier today about the advantages of thinking about building things versus breaking them, and the long history of thought that goes into building something and creating something versus this quick tearing down of something. And I think what the reference desk woman was saying was, like, there are all these wonderful lineages of thought that we can tell you about, and we can give you access to, and we can show you how these things fit together here at the library. But when you're just kind of searching through those things, it's much easier online to break things.
Yeah. You know, before that person at the desk punches her time card, would somebody go take her picture? Because we need to say, this is what the University of Texas does for students, is it teaches them to think like that. Right?
Yeah.
Because that's pretty remarkable that an undergraduate student would say that. I mean, I'm very proud of it. I don't even know this kid, but I'm taking credit for it.
It's all you, Bob.
But I think, you know, if we look back through human history, in the sciences, for example, you know, there are many scientific projects that are funded by government agencies because no company would fund something that seems so obscure and so arcane. And we think, why are we spending money on this? You know, why does it make any difference to know about that? And, you know, someone in our society, somewhere along the way, somewhere in the course of human history, decided that understanding how the world works was generally a valuable thing. Even though all parts of knowing how the world works are not valuable necessarily immediately, which is another way of saying what Art was saying a minute ago. But I just want to tell you about one example, which many of you probably know about. In the 70s, some biologists in Japan wanted to know why this particular species of jellyfish fluoresced in the sea. And they found the gene in this jellyfish that actually made it fluoresce green, and they called it GFP for green fluorescent protein. And, and they thought, well, that's interesting, you know, but okay, fine, jellyfish, whatever. That's one of the most used devices now in learning how organisms of all kinds, not just jellyfish, work, because once somebody later than that figured out how to insert genes into the genomes of other organisms, right? We could now, I say we like I did it, but we can now take that little string of the gene that produces a green fluorescent protein, attach it to another part of an organism, and now we can watch where that green glow goes over the course of an organism's life or after a delivery of a drug or whatever it happens to be. And again, I think most people who are economically minded and don't necessarily enjoy the wonder of knowing things just because they're so cool to know, would see that and say, boy, what a waste of money. And it had no use until it did. And I think one of the things that characterizes great repositories of what human beings have created is there are things here that we don't even know whether they're valuable or not until they are. Yeah. And that to me, you know, if anybody wants to have a good reason that we would build buildings, especially beautiful buildings, to keep all this stuff in and have places for people to come and chat and have conversations about things, that to me is the winning answer to that question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And on top of that, I do want to sort of reiterate the importance of those random conversations too, right? I mean, so we live in a world in which people often don't get together. I mean, it's actually a wonderful thing to look out and see this many people who've gotten together. And I hope at some point you turn around to somebody you didn't know before you walked in the room and say hi to them and get to know them a little bit, because you know, these in-person social connections matter a lot. You know, it is rare in this day and age that anything of importance happens because a single person does all of it, right? We succeed as a species because of that ability to find ways to work together. And the kinds of problems that we have to solve, if you look at politics at the local, state, or national, or even international level, the kinds of problems that we're focused on trying to solve they're big problems, and there isn't a simple answer. There isn't like one knob we can turn that will just fix it. We've pretty much solved all those, right? So now this gets to much more subtle things that we have to do. The only way that's going to happen is if we work together with people. And the fact is that finding those people that we want to work with is partly, you know, a process of like looking in some directory to find out, well, who's the expert in this. But a lot of it is these more inefficient happenstance processes that require spaces where people get together and bump into each other and have conversations where then they can go, you need to talk to that person because the two of you really would benefit from that interaction. And so, you know, we lose something by retreating to our offices and sending a lot of emails and making comments on social media. And it's not that I'm dissing social media or even offices. It's just that every once in a while, it's actually kind of important to get out of all that and mingle a little bit. And I think, you know, I think UT does a great job of creating those spaces. I think the new library does a great job of that. I mean, Bob and I earlier today were wandering through the new engineering building, and it's got all these great spaces where students can just hang out and talk to each other. And those are actually where a lot of useful work is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, I mean, I don't think we can emphasize how important that connection between space and time is. You know, these are spaces not only where you can bump into people, but you can experience kind of like a deep time, or a time which is like an indefinite, infinite now?
Yeah.
You know, what is that? It's a Jewish mystic thing. Help me out here.
I'm gonna let you run
But
with
is
that.
this so? Okay, I'll run with this. So I mean, like what James Baldwin said. You know, you think that your pain and misery are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read,
Right.
like, you know, you connect with people who throughout space and time have similar thoughts, you know,
Yeah.
and you can come to these spaces where you can then, like, I don't know about y'all, but like when I walk into a library, my entire being changes. It's like I've just entered a space where I can experience different worlds and connect with a different sense of history and my own self, you know. So I really do think, like, not only are the spaces important, but the way that we experience time within these spaces is also important.
And that happens in two ways, right? Time both expands and compresses in libraries, right? So part of it is that you come into a building like this and you have this space which provides you with a chance for some intellectual exploration. You don't just have to work on an assignment while you're here. You can explore a little bit. You can pull that book off the shelf and read. And so it, you know, at one level, the library becomes an engine of inefficiency, right? In that it gives you these opportunities to do things that are off task but still really important. But it also compresses time. And it compresses time in the sense that libraries are also repositories of history. And so you can read the words of someone who wrote 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, and connect yourself immediately to things that happened over long periods of time. And so it's a weird space from a time standpoint because you get to do both of those at the same time. And I think maybe, you know, since Bob started us off on the track of inefficiency, as he so often does.
It's actually my gift. It's my gift.
I think maybe that becomes the biggest lesson of the day is that value of not feeling like every single thing that you do has to be a means to a particular known end.
Yeah, I want to follow up on something that Rebecca, you said just a minute ago about, you know, walking into a library and feeling a different thing. You know, when you want to know the values of a society or the values of a culture, a good way to determine that is look at where they invest their resources. You know, and I have to tell you, I've lived in Austin now for 33 years. I joined the university faculty when I was 8 years old, and I have to say that a city like Austin would invest in building a public library like the one that we've just completed makes me very proud to be an Austinite, because it's an expression of values. It says, you know, this matters to us. This matters to our city, and it's a statement to other people about the things that we care about. I mean, I think often, you know, when you ask what things are good for, I think what people are really asking and saying is, what is the immediate utilitarian purpose of this thing? And, you know, symbolism, it ain't beanbag, you know? I mean, symbolism's a real deal. And when you think about what having a library and collecting things, and not just here in the UT Library in Perry Castaneda, or in the Austin Public Library, or in the Harry Ransom Center, or the Briscoe Center, or any of those places where somebody said it is worth it to our society, to our institution, to collect these things that may seldom, if ever, be used by another human being. But it's important that we keep them because they're part of our history. They're part of what has led to the cultural present that we now experience. I mean, it shouldn't just happen out of whole cloth, even though, you know, young people sort of, listen to me, I'm the oldest guy on this panel, by the way. Yeah, you know, those kids, It's just like everything just happened, a week ago. It's hard to imagine that there was a time when everybody didn't have an iPhone, or that people read, stacks of paper glued together called books. It was just a whole different deal. But the thing is, to actually have a sense of where you are as an individual human being, where you are as part of a culture, where you are as part of a society, requires that you have a sense of the history of what you're experiencing. I was giving a couple talks in England a couple of years ago, and I'd gone to the campus of Cambridge, where I'd never visited before, and I was talking to one of the guests here tonight about that. And I was just so struck by the fact that, these buildings, some of these buildings were here in the 1600s. I was just awed by it. And one of the things that I think libraries have the potential to share is a sense of awe about our history, right? Which you can't just have somebody tell you about on a Nova special, or on a History Channel special. There's something truly, the word awesome is very much overused now, but there is truly something awesome about holding a book, that was written many years ago, potentially hundreds of years ago, right? That actually someone, this was their mind at that time, That's something that I think often in the effort to be efficient, we think, oh yeah, all that emotional stuff, yeah. Well, that emotional stuff is us. That emotional stuff is how human beings function. I think we would like to think that we're often just sort of these rational, ledger paper. These are the positives, these are the negatives. People, we ain't that at all. We're emotional, social people, and part of what even talking about the most dry, arcane, formulas of whatever, there's something human about that you can't experience the way you could at a library.
So just to amplify on that a little bit, so I write for a bunch of places, and one of the places I write for is Fast Company, and I just submitted a thing that's going to come out early next week, so you get a preview of this. that I titled, they're going to change the title because they always do, but I titled it the best business book you're going to read this year is probably a novel. And it's because I think there's a tendency for people to think, oh, I've got this skill I need to learn. Let me go grab the latest wisdom from some CEO or some psychologist who's going to tell me how to think or whatever it is. But actually, a lot of the fundamental problems that we face in the world all over the place they're human problems. As a guy who gave a talk right before me at a conference, we were talking to a bunch of construction industry people, and he looked out at this audience of people from the construction industry, and he said, how many of you routinely have projects that fail because of a problem with communication? And like every hand in the room went up. And he said, great. He said, how many of you routinely have projects that fail because of a problem with your communication devices? Right? And not a hand went up. It's not the technology, it's the ability for people to communicate effectively together and to understand each other. Well, where is that understanding going to come from, right? What are some of the ways that we can achieve that? Frankly, no matter how many stories you read by successful CEOs, you're going to learn just a little tiny bit about the emotional lives of the people that you encounter and their goals and the things that they strive for. And if you read a targeted book about how to be more self-confident or more creative or whatever it is, you're going to learn another little tiny sliver of that. But you pick up a great novel, even if it's a romance, right? It's a big romance.
What do you mean, even if it's a romance?
Especially if it's a romance. But what I'm saying is, you pick up some great novel where people are struggling with their human emotions and their conflicts and all of the things that go into the way that people engage with each other. You will walk away with a better understanding of the people around you, a better sense of how to look at what people are doing. And where are you going to find that stuff, right? One of the beauties of libraries is that they have fiction sections too, right? And we often want to dismiss that. We're gonna, the university library, we ought to just have the nonfiction. Let's just go in. We'll have the fiction for a couple of those literary students, but but really, let's get to the science and everything else. No, right? Let's read a book and learn about how people are interacting, and stumble on one that you would not have read before, that falls outside of, that doesn't involve some spy who saves the world at the very last minute, 13 pages before the end, but something that just involves, people's lives. There's just so much richness
There is. Yeah.
Well, I think too, I was just having a conversation with Jackie Fuller, who I work with at KUT, and she was saying she's starting to write a novel, right? She's a writer, so she's starting to write this novel. And I said,
even if she wasn't a writer,
well,
once she
is
started
now,
working on
right?
the novel, she'd be a writer.
She is now. She's a writer. She writes things.
It's kind of how it works.
Yeah, And I said, this is the best weapon we have against immortality, to write. But I think it's only a weapon if we value the past words of people who have written, and if we say, like, this lives on, that's the only way we can actually continue to live on through the work that we do.
And that's the Ray Bradbury, right?
And that's Ray Bradbury.
You get to Fahrenheit 451, and not to spoil it for those of you who haven't read it, but in a world in which people didn't value books, so that the firemen were actually
Well, he also
lighting
said,
fires, people embodied individual books, right? I mean, that was the the words were so important that they had to actually live on literally through particular individuals.
and he said also, like, you don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. You just have to get people to stop reading them,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
could never happen.
Never. We do have a couple people who are working in the library institutions that we are discussing this evening, and I'd like to invite them on stage because they might have more thoughts to share. One is Dr. Lorraine Haricombe, and she is the Vice Provost and Director of the University of Texas Libraries here at UT. Lorraine, welcome to the stage. Am I wrong in inviting you to the stage? No, she's coming. Okay. Eventually around. And Roosevelt Weeks also, who is the director of the Austin Public Library. So they're going to come and join us for more of a conversation. We'll have their insight into the importance of libraries also. So Lorraine, welcome. Roosevelt, welcome. So what do you guys think? What do you think? Did we touch upon some
I'm in
things?
love with these three people. Absolutely in love. Gosh.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you for all that wonderful information about libraries. It's wonderful to sit and listen other people tell the story about it.
And I got chills bumps just listening to you guys talk about the importance of libraries and what they mean to people, and sharing knowledge and exchanging knowledge and emotional ties to it. Oh, it was just wonderful. Gosh, absolutely wonderful.
You were talking about books, and we live in a digital era, of course, and it seems as if it's moving faster in that direction. I was a doctoral student at the University of Illinois, and my dissertation advisor predicted the paperless society. W. Lancaster, for those of you who are librarians, predicted the paperless society, and he had more paper in his office because I was his researcher. Bless his soul, he's no longer around, but I think we all can agree that we will probably always have books. We will probably always have books, and that is what libraries do so well, is to preserve the human record, so that we can go back in time to the materials that we have preserved for the next generation, whether they know about it or whether they will ever use it. We have preservation facilities because we don't have space for the books that we buy, and so we put them away in high quality preservation facilities to make sure that just in case somebody needs to do the research, that we'll be able to retrieve them if they're not digitally available. So it's both the analog and the digital that need to live side by side. Analog is what it used to be, and digital needs the analog to be able to.
So what are the big problems that libraries are facing today?
For me, I think it's people thinking that Google can answer all their questions, and that you can get your information from anywhere other than libraries. I have a technology background. I got a degree in computer science, and I didn't realize what libraries meant to people until I actually volunteered in a library, and I was teaching a computer class to an individual who needed a promotion on a job, and she needed to pass this test, understanding Word. And I worked with this young lady for at least 3 weeks, on and off. And she came back into the library with this blueberry pie in her hand, saying, "I got the job. I got the job." And for me, that made me understand the power of libraries and what they mean to people. And for people not to understand that, there's some folks out there that don't understand that libraries are important enough, how it changes lives. The relevancy of libraries, people don't see it. And it's people like yourself that talking about it, that showing what the meaning of what libraries, what they mean, is just it's a wonderful thing.
You know, that reminds me, my grandfather grew up in Wales. And in Wales, when he was growing up, he was a miner. And they always said, like, if you're poor in Wales, you don't really need education.
Right.
We don't need to give you access to education. And it was a crime to educate people who were poor in Wales at the time. And what you said, makes me think, there are so many barriers to information that we don't even realize until we try to overcome, the barriers, and we try to just get basic information about how to do things, about how to enter the workforce. And libraries, as public libraries, afford you a space to do that. And I think sometimes that's not even acknowledged how important that is.
I call it the People's University. Everything in our libraries are free. They're absolute free. Our central library is who's been to our central library? No, better yet, who hadn't been to our library? You got to get by there. Just walking through the building and hearing our customers talking about how wonderful it is, and saying it in different languages just excites you. And then when someone come up and say, "How much is it to get a library card?" I'm like, that's what we're for. They're free. Everything is in there free. But there are countries where you have to pay to go into libraries. Here in this country, it's wonderful. You don't have to pay to go to our libraries and use the resources that could help better your life and to live life in a way that you want it to be.
I just want to add when you were mentioning, Google, and I think Google should be included in the barriers to getting information. Because it is true that you can type in some words into the search bar and stuff will come back. And I don't know, if you ever look at the little number about how many things your question just returned, but it's usually, in the hundreds of thousands, if not more. Well, now what, right? I've got 100,000 things, and which one of those is the one that I should either trust or pursue or whatever? And I think, when we consider one of the real impediments to people being able to really take in knowledge in an effective way, it's speed, not the drug. Going fast, right? And we just sort of, as a matter of course, assume that faster is better, right? And in fact, I don't want to offend anybody here, but I might, but I have tenure, that's why I can do this stuff. But a lot of students in high schools take advanced placement courses. And the in parentheses under AP should be really fast, right? We're going to blow through the subject matter so fast you can't believe it. That's how you know it's advanced, because we're going really fast. And then students come to believe that's what it means to really understand something. You go really fast. And what a book does is it slows you down. It makes you go slow. And you have to wait. And something unfolds over time. And almost all the problems that Art and I recognize in students trying to accomplish something difficult and important is a lack of acceptance of how long many things take to do, right? I mean, the idea is if I'm good at this, my measure of my good is I can go really fast, you know? And people are frustrated with me, and I'm sure they are with art too, that what we're trying to do is slow things down.
But it's not just slow, it's also there needs to be depth. I mean, the beauty of a book is that it's a few hundred pages on that topic, not 650 words, which is what you find when you look at Google. And the problem is that detail matters if you're going to do anything of note. The number of people who say, well, just give me the 50,000 foot view. You know what? The problem with the 50,000 foot view is that when you fall from there, it hurts a lot. Okay? So really, we have to be responsible for the details of things, which means actually reading all of those pages in the book, which takes time. But what it does is it gives you this appreciation for the complexity. So a famous person not long ago, and I'm going to get this quote wrong, but he said something like, "Who knew healthcare could be this complicated?" and when I heard that quote, and I don't remember who said it.
I don't remember either. No, I don't.
But when I heard that quote, I thought almost everyone. But you have to be willing to hold yourself responsible for the details of something, to understand that to accomplish anything actually requires a real deep understanding and not a 50,000 foot view. And Google, not of its own fault, but because of the content of what gets the most links to it on the internet, gives you a lot of 50,000 foot views.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just wanted to come back to Rebecca's question about what's the most challenging. I can assure you there's never a dull moment in any library. It's not the place where you shoo anybody anymore. Here, if you were not here, this place would otherwise have tables all over and there'll be students. Well, it's Thursday night. They're already on a weekend break. But this space is chock full of students any night. And this space is open 24/5. And there's a huge dorm across the street, and they bring their dinner in here to sit and eat and work together. So it is absolutely a space where they feel at home, because it's both an intellectual commons, it's a gathering space, it's a place where work gets done for them, this place and the one behind that wall. But one of the challenges for me is to have the people who love the book and then keeping up with the expectation of a new generation who expects everything to be faster. So I always think of an old Pepsi ad that said, every generation refreshes our thinking about what we need to do and how we need to serve up our services and so on. And I just wanted to come back for a minute to what you were talking about, art. Got it right?
Yeah.
And that is the librarians, the people with the expertise to help the children in public libraries or in school libraries understand how to interpret, how to read. And our librarians here in academic institutions and in community colleges who teach information literacy, who help them and equip them with the tools and the skills to put it all together, because we can have all the books in the world. That's information. You can do nothing with information without tools and skills to put it to good use. Mm-hmm. And that's one form of creativity. Another is, like Socrates said, the library is the birthplace. It's the delivery room for the birth of ideas. And libraries increasingly are changing to keep up with students in academic setting who come and expect that to be the norm. They want that to be the norm. So the spaces that you see around here, that's a tutoring space for STEM students, for example, over there. And you see what it looks like, full of formulas, etc. In our Fine Arts Library, we have the Foundry, where they can find just about anything and everything to be creative. In the public library,
what libraries do very well is not just democratize access to information, but now increasingly democratize access to creativity, because that's what our students graduate into. They graduate into an economy of imagination and creativity, and the library is that place on a campus, in a community where they can go and expect to get that for free.
That's right.
You know, I mean, that just makes me think about what types of spaces we cultivate, you know, in our society. And I was speaking of libraries, I was listening to a lecture that Masha Gessen gave at the New York Public Library. And she brought up, you know, these spaces where we can either have the freedom to choose what we're going to be interested in, how we're going to live in the world, and also spaces where there's freedom from choice, you know? And thinking about what are the spaces that we're cultivating as citizens? Are we cultivating spaces where there's freedom from choice? Or are we cultivating spaces where there's freedom to choose?
And to jump on that, I mean, I remember listening to an episode of StoryCorps, which on NPR, which is, you know, that people talk about their stories, and it really ought to come with a warning. Please pull over if you're driving right now, because you might be crying in the next 2 minutes, and then it's really hard to drive. And there was a story of a guy who later went into education, but grew up as a poor black man in the South, and he talked about how it wasn't really cool to read, and he would go to his library and he would steal he didn't want to take the book out because he didn't want anyone to see him taking the book out. So he'd steal a book, and then he'd bring it back the next week and he'd steal another book. And years later, he was talking with the librarian at the library and apologized for stealing the books. And the librarian said, "I knew you were stealing the books. I kept putting other books I thought you'd be interested in that corner." And it had this profound impact on the rest of his life. And you know, Rebecca, as you're talking about this idea of that freedom to choose, right? One of the beautiful things about a library is that it is a place of books and a place of knowledge. And so no matter where you came from, no matter what the values were in the particular place you were before you walked into the library, the place matters. And the place gives you that freedom to engage as you choose to engage. And so, you know, the other aspect of democratizing is creating spaces in which it's cool to learn something and it's appropriate to learn something. And no matter where you came from and what the forces were around you, the library provides that oasis. And space matters a lot. And you know, the virtual world that we've created is wonderful, but it doesn't allow people to transcend the physical space that they occupy, and sometimes you need to do that.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking about inefficiency, which I started this off with tonight. My other plug I want to get in tonight is a plug for joy. With my advancing age, joy has become increasingly important to me. That's now my top priority. But I find that many of our students don't seem as joyful as I would like them to be about opportunities that are precious, that are wonderful. Not just the opportunity of being in our classes, which are also precious, but to be a part of a great university and a great city with great resources and be generally healthy and those kinds of things. But I think one of the things that's happened just with the pace of the world, when I see students in a hallway and I say, "So how's it going?" I mean, usually the old mindless response was fine. You know, how you doing? Fine. How are you doing? I'm fine too. Okay, we got that out of the way. But now, that's not what students say to me. I say, "How's it going?" They say, "Busy." They say, "Busy." That's the word that comes up all the time. And there's a fatalism in their voice that I don't have any control over this. You know, I am at the mercy of all of these people who are putting demands on my time and attention that I really can't escape. And I think, you know, one of the things that gets people to have a greater sense of joy in their experience is coming back to the idea of slowing things down. You know, joy doesn't happen fast, right? Joy takes time to develop. And if you're looking for like a quick fix on something joyful, you know, you might flip on a kitten video for a few minutes on YouTube, as Art and I have written about in our book Brain Briefs, which is available on Amazon. But I think, did I say that out loud? But it creates it creates opportunities for experiencing a feeling that many young learners don't have, right? I often talk to school faculty who are teaching primary and secondary school, and I really plug the joy angle on all this. You know, I can't imagine a less efficient way to teach children to love to read books than assigning them books and making them write reports about what they read. I don't know any adults who do this for pleasure. You know, I mean, when I read a good book, I don't say, well, it's nice to read this book, but I got to get that report done. That's not what happens, right? I mean, people engage with literature, and what do? You talk to other people who also read, and they might have read what you read. You might recommend something to them. They might recommend something to you. So there's a human interactive part to all of that doesn't happen in school. So part of the amplifier of the joy is shared experience, right? I mean, we tend to think of reading as a solitary thing. You know, you're alone and you have your book, and that's certainly part of it, and that's a lovely thing. But one of the things about being in a community of readers, which you tend to find in libraries and bookstores, is you get to talk with other people and share interpretations and reactions to things that you've experienced.
You know,
Sorry.
oh, go ahead.
Go.
You talk.
I know. But you know, because to get back to something that was running through a bunch of this is that, you know, life in the modern world involves stepping into a conversation that's been happening for a very long time, and one of the things that books do is that they give you that chance to figure out what the history of that conversation was, right? And so the beauty of engaging with books of all kinds is this opportunity to understand the resonances of things that are happening around you, right? The references that someone's making that allow you to realize, oh, they're really calling back to this other thing that you miss completely if you haven't immersed yourself in this wonderful written history of the world, right? So 70,000 years ago, when we didn't have written words, we lived in a society that had 3 generations of people that would hang around, and so your sense of history was what older people in the society knew about, and then that was it, you know. And they may remember some stories that came from before that, but there wasn't this opportunity to believe that you were engaging in a very long-term, very deep, fascinating conversation. And so, you know, the other reason that libraries and literature and this collection of the written word is so important is that it is easy when you look at the internet to believe that all you need to do is to kind of catch up on the last 2 weeks worth of stuff that's been written, and you know everything that's going on. Yeah. And the reason that this frustrates me is because so many people that I bump into in my professional life believe that the world is completely different now, that our problems are brand new problems because the world moves so quickly, because we have so much technology. And while this isn't literature and it's going to help me to tell this story, when I taught at Columbia University before I was here, and my mom and I used to go to the city opera together because my dad hates the opera, and so she and I would go. And people would say, why do you go to the opera? And I'd say, well, you know, the music's great and the singing's great. But the real reason I go is that most of the operas I see are old. I mean, really old, hundreds of years old. And they are a reminder that none of the problems we're facing right now are actually new problems, right? People have been messing with each other in every possible way for as long as we can remember. And books do the same thing. They help.
I just let me create a whole new rationale for opera. I just love it. That's it.
And the music's good too. But and it just, the more ways that we can remind ourselves that we actually live in a continuity of human experience, I think the better able we are to put the kinds of problems that we face in some perspective.
Not only, touching on that, and also what Bob was saying about joy, I was listening to a discussion with Junot Diaz, and he was describing libraries as banquets, And here's a banquet for you to feast upon.
Oh, wow.
And I was thinking about I interviewed Sidney Mintz a couple years ago, the anthropologist Sidney Mintz, before he died. And he
Harder to
said,
interview him after he died.
well, you don't know my powers. You obviously don't know what I can do with interviews. But we were talking about what in this conversation about food and efficiency and calories and all of these different things about food. He said, somewhere in there, taste has to come into the discussion. Food should taste good, at least. And thinking about books and literature and access to ideas as a banquet, it's somewhere in there taste has to come in. Somewhere in there joy has to come in. And when you think about, of course you can order any food from Amazon. You can order any, now that they're with Whole Foods, I'm sure you can get whatever. But with the efficiency and the quickness of food and ideas and literature and things that you can have at your doorstep if you have FEMA Prime or Amazon Prime, there's this dissonance between those ideas of value and joy and taste. And that has to come in there somewhere, in how we interact with books and ideas.
And a lot of this has to do, I think, with modeling. I think we often underestimate how much observing other people influences what we think about what matters and what's valuable and what's worth our time and those kinds of things. And I think, for those of us who have children and grandchildren, showing people what happens when you come to a library, or you go to an art museum, or you go to the opera, or you go somewhere, you see that there are all these people who value this, all these people who have not only sunk their money into a ticket, but they've come here because they think this is something important, even though it has no obvious utilitarian value whatsoever. I think every teacher hates a small number of questions that are often asked, and one is, when are we ever going to use this? And I didn't have an answer for that for a long time, and then I came up with one. I thought it was so clever, so I'll share it with you. So Sue's got to say, Dr. Duke, when are we ever going to use this? And I said, well, have you gone to a movie in the last 2 weeks? Oh yeah. I said, when are you ever going to use that? Now the thing that's important to think about that's not the way human beings calibrate where they invest their time and effort and energy, right? So once we start to make that the calculator, right, when you're going to use it, well, now you've changed the whole equation, right? But I'm getting back to my joy theme again. But the sense of awe, the joy of experiencing something, and sharing it with other people, is something that creates a sense of value in individuals that they might not start out with, right? I mean, the people who say, why would we spend all this money to build buildings and put old stuff in them? I don't think those people have ever, perhaps, but certainly not often, sat in a place and actually just contemplated the stuff that's in there. Now, you have to take time to do that. You can't happen fast, and you can't Google it. It takes time. But I think all the things that we've been talking about today all kind of have a connection to human interaction, right? I mean, I work in a field, as Art does, where every relevant journal that we work in is available online. I don't have any paper journals in my office anymore because I can get to anything I want to on my laptop, right? There's no reason to do that.
From the library.
Right. From the but what I miss when I do that, because I now have ways that feed me articles that I've already said are relevant because I've identified keywords that I care about. But what I miss is what Art was talking about a minute ago, thumbing through a journal and coming upon an article which I didn't even think had anything to do with me, and maybe doesn't, but it's just written so beautifully. And the experiment was conducted so elegantly. And I never would have found that if I didn't have that physical thing to deal with.
I still get the paper journals, and then I recycle them later. But I actually, for that reason, right?
Yeah.
We just taped a show today on dog cognition, or as I like to call it, dognition.
I knew you would work that into tonight. I didn't know how you were going to do it, but I knew it was going to get in
We're
here.
not sure if it's going to air.
And bravo to you, sir.
It was the least I could do.
Oh!
So, but I stumbled on this because I had the paper journal sitting in my office, and there was a special issue of a journal all about dog cognition. And I thought, I got to read this. I have no professional interest in dog cognition whatsoever. I'm never going to do a study with dogs. I have dogs, but they're not that smart. They're adorable. But I have there's absolutely no reason for me to have read this stuff, except that we have a show. But I stumbled on it, and I read it, and actually it was you'll stick around in a couple of weeks, the show will come out. It was so exciting to read that stuff that I got sucked into this journal, and I feel better for having read it.
Now, I have to say, this ebullient buoyancy that you recognize in my dear friend Art, this is just what he was doing in the studio a couple hours ago.
Yeah.
And he kept looking at me like, aren't you going to say anything? Because I wouldn't say anything, which is uncharacteristic for me. But I was just enjoying him, just loving these damn dog things. It was just amazing to watch. And I think that's what many people don't see related to ideas. I mean, enjoyment is what you do, when you go swimming, but an idea, who could get that excited about an idea? And my argument is, everybody could, but somebody's got to cook it right, right? And that requires a certain setting, and it requires certain guides to lead you in certain ways to find certain things, and it requires compatriots to share your experience with, and that's how you get to that, right? And I think you look at many students whose just their countenance is just generally dark. I mean, what are you doing? I'm learning. I think, God, what's wrong with you? And the thing is, I can't fault them because we taught them to think like that.
I can't wait to get out of school, so I'm done learning.
I had a student a number of years ago. I'm an academic advisor in the Butler School of Music. We have so-called professional advisors, but the faculty advise the students. And I had a student come in my office. One day, it was like November, a couple weeks left in the semester. She sits down in my office and says, "Oh, God, Dr. Duke, I'm really getting burned out. I'm burned out with school." Now, she's a sophomore. And only a couple more weeks this semester. And I said, a couple weeks into the semester, and then there's a break. There's another semester after that. And then, because you're a sophomore, there's some more semesters after that. And by the way, you're preparing to be a teacher, so there's going to be another semester the rest of your life, But the idea of sort of getting stuff over with that is onerous so you can get on to the good part, for people who are waiting for their life to start, we try to remind them as often as possible, life's already started and this is it. So either you find ways to make this rewarding and interesting and something that's worth paying attention to, or you're going to be spending a lot of time being unhappy, and then you're going to get hit by a bus, and the good stuff's not even going to happen. So, better. That was kind of dark too, wasn't it?
Wow.
Lovely.
I don't know where that came from.
That took an unexpected turn.
Well, yeah, weren't you the joy guy?
Set it out for us.
Let this be a lesson to you. But I think that, that kind of experience is something that we can actually curate in a place where knowledge is valued and understanding is valued and experiences are valued, and there are multiple people who share those values.
And actually, I just one thing while we're doing this. So, how many of you here tonight are students, like actual students at UT? Okay, good. So, yay for you. Okay, really, because that is, part of the college experience, right? Is the stuff that doesn't happen in class, right? It's actually taking advantage of all of this other stuff that happens here. I mean, sadly, you may have wasted your evening tonight, but experiences like this will turn out to be really valuable over the course of your time here. And I think that, I mean, I think it's so important to realize that it's the totality of what you engage in. It's not just the stuff that somebody told you to do that ends up making you wise or creative, right? It's your engagement with everything that matters so much. And so I'm so big hand for all the students who came out tonight, because
You mentioned that not everything happened in a class. I always think of the library as that extension of the classroom, because your students spend so much more time here in this space and in libraries generally than they do in your class in any semester. And we see that. We have data to show, the traffic in and out of this building, not any of the others even. It's not the dorm room. It's not the classroom. It's that third space on a campus that's neutral. And I always think of libraries as the little Switzerland on campuses. It belongs to everybody.
That's right.
And we're neutral. Yeah. We have opinions, and we do take stands. There's a whole social justice issue to our profession as well. But on a campus like this, the library is absolutely, absolutely critical. So I have a question, because we talked about the value of libraries, both the public library in its new manifestation and a library like this. We all inherently understand and heard tonight the importance of that library, what it does and what it can do for you. Why is it, and some of that is because it's there and because it's free, it's almost like oxygen. We just breathe it in, we don't even think about it sometimes. Why is it so difficult to get funding for libraries? What's the disconnect? If we all agree on the importance of it for any variety of reasons, whether it's, I'm not suggesting, because we just have a brand new, beautiful building down, but this happens on academic campuses, not at UT. It happens in every library that I've led, and across the nation. School libraries, who were the first people to go? The school librarians, so they closed the school libraries, etc. Same thing at high schools and so on. What is that disconnect? Can you help me understand what that disconnect is?
Yeah. Oh, can I? You want to?
Go right ahead.
Because I just want to dive in, because I want to say one thing real quick, and then which is part of the problem is, one of the mantras that we get lately is we have to treat X like a business, where X is government, education, healthcare, all sorts of other things. And it turns out that the modern corporation was designed to do things efficiently, repeatably, and reliably, right? If you have this thing you want to do, like churn out a Model T, and you're going to learn how to do it fast, efficient, the same way every time, right? And so that's what businesses do really well, is that they create opportunities for people to do things efficiently, repeatably, and reliably. Now, the problem is that not everything in life requires efficiency, repeatability, and reliability. Actually, innovation, creativity, joy, are things that are inefficient, not always repeatable, and often not particularly reliable. Most innovations fail, right? But they enrich our lives. There's a lot of bad artwork. One of the things we know about creativity is that the most creative people, the people who create the best creative output, create the most output. Picasso made a lot of stuff that's horrible. And the Beatles wrote a lot of bad songs, right? But along the way, they also wrote some brilliant songs, and Picasso made some artwork that is timeless, right? So here's the problem, right? If we're going to start treating our society as if everything needs to function like a business, we are going to stamp out inefficiency. We are going to stamp out creativity. We are going to stamp out those things that are not easily repeatable. And things like libraries don't fit that corporate model of things. But that is entirely the wrong model for thinking about education, for thinking about healthcare, for thinking about the way governments should function. They are not businesses. They are serving very different human needs. And so part of what we need to do is to remove some number of the people who give that business mantra and replace them with people who understand a little bit more about the human condition.
And I would just add one thing to that. When most people say they want to run things like, this should be run like a business, really what they're saying is, I want this to run like my idealized version of business, which really doesn't exist in the business world, right? But I mean, anybody who's worked in a business, the idea that everything is blindingly efficient and, it's just, well, anyway, I don't need to go on about that.
And the tough thing is, we don't tell our story of what we do really well. As librarians and library lovers, we know the value of it. But talking to someone outside of libraries, telling them what we do is hard. The joy that you see up here, you come to our library, you see that all the time. But you can't put a dollar value on that. When I go into our building, I just love working in that building. To hear kids laughing, to hear them working through some problems, to see people have their business plan on our board, in our workspaces, that's something that we don't tell that story enough. To talk about how we incubate businesses and how kids are coming up with new ideas on how to do things that right now they're doing it now, and later on they're going to put that to the task and to put it to some business, show them how to do their work better. And so we don't do a good job at telling that story, and we need to get better at that.
Well, and I think one other piece of this, of your question, Lorraine, is that we tend to connect. I mean, human beings, we tend to do this. We try to connect causes and effects, and the time distance between the cause of a library and the effect of a library is enormous, right? So and it's not entirely reliable. So I would say the same answer to the question of, why don't people support libraries is the same reason people don't save enough money for retirement, because it's out there somewhere, right? It's not clear about that. It's why people don't change their oil, because right now this works, why would I invest money in doing this thing? And my car starts every day, at least it has for a while. And so all those sort of things that develop over time, that pay off over time, are hard for most human beings to recognize. And it's for the same reason, like you said, school librarian. But by the way, my daughter is the school librarian at Brecker was elementary school. So I mean, we get that. It's a family business for us, right? So, when you think about all the things that people tend, especially when money is tight, we say, where are the things where we can see a tight connection between that pays for that, right? But to say, well, what we're going to do is give these people experiences, and at some point in their lives, these experiences may play into their thinking in a way that opens up new ideas. Well, you're already off. You've been turned off by then. But the idea that that's a value is represented, and this is always my case about, we're talking about social justice and those kinds of things, is what do people who have resources provide their children? They provide them books and travel and arts experiences and healthcare and all kinds of things. That's what people of means do. They're voting with their checkbooks and their pocketbooks, right? So if that's what people do when they have the wherewithal to do it, then shouldn't we as a culture, as a society, take the responsibility for making sure that all children have that, right? So if you don't have a lot of books in your home, there's a place that has more books than you've ever seen in your life, and you can steal them, right?
That's right.
and so
You're like, don't take my bus.
yeah, they can edit that out. But this is as much of an equal opportunity argument as it is trying to make the case for why this is ultimately good.
You know, I do also think, though, that we are at a point where this idea of public good and private investment is at a little bit of a crossroads.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I heard something the other day on Here and Now. Of course, I was on the air, so I wasn't really listening to what was going on. But like, and it was a conversation about investing in tollways in Texas. You know, and these private companies coming in and building tollways, and that was how infrastructure was going to be developed, was in private tollways. And I just thought about how disheartening it is to think that I can't get from one area of town to the other area of town without having to pay a fine, you know, and without having to pay a toll. And just that barrier to entry was very disheartening to me, and it was because it was, you know, run by a private firm, and roads were not seen as something that everyone in the public should have access to. And I think we're you know, sometimes it's difficult to understand the value of investments in public radio, in public media, in public universities, in public libraries, because we take it for granted, because we're not investing in it, you know, directly, and we're not getting a return from it, but it's there and it's open to everyone, and we just take it for granted, like it's always going to be around.
I don't know who would tout the efficiency of businesses' ability to do things who's ever seen the construction project on Mopac. I mean, how could you?
Seriously,
You know?
seriously. But I mean, think about it. Like, you know, oh, we're going to invest in infrastructure, which means we're going to give money to private companies to build tollways. I mean, that's like, that just makes me, I don't know, maybe I'm becoming too political, but I really think it's kind of a little bit disheartening to think that, like, that's not investing in infrastructure for the public, that's investing in private firms, which is different than saying we're going to create a library, we're going to create a roadway that's going to be for everybody to use. Mm-hmm. And everyone should have access to it no matter whether or not they can pay the toll.
Well, profitability and shareholder value are not the only ways of evaluating the effectiveness of an institution, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that this gets back to, you know, what are our cultural values? Do we value knowledge? Do we value joy? Do we value those opportunities to engage in the long-standing human conversation? And of course, you know, as a public university, part of our mission is to spread the joy of engaging in that long-term conversation and engaging with the resources like libraries that permit people to be a part of that. But again, I think we do live in an era in which that is not a value that is always widely held, and I completely agree. We need to tell that story better. We need to tell that story better for libraries, and we need to tell it better for universities, and we need to tell it better for public media, and you know, these are things that that need to be a fundamental part of what our society values.
I mean, that's really important because, you know, especially with media, when you consider your success in media in the same platform as all of media, if one of my stories gets 75,000 downloads, that's great. But my daughter's slime account has over 1.5 million views per day. Right. And that's media. So if we're thinking about libraries versus anything that we can get online that's access to books, and we're valuing those in the same metrics, that's a completely different value system that I think we need to take into consideration.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We also built in a little time for Q&A. So I'm going to, if you all agree,
Sure. Yeah.
open it up to the floor. And if you have a question, would you please make your way to the microphone, or is there a roving microphone? Is there one? Okay,
Right in the middle.
so it's right in the middle of the floor in the aisle here. So if you have a question, please make your way there, and you will be recorded. This is a recording. It
Feel
will be
free
made
not
available.
to ask a question.
Once again, we've stunned people into
Exactly.
These guys can talk for days, believe you me.
Yeah.
And they have.
Don't be shy.
Chema.
Yes. I don't have a question, and I'll just speak very loudly, but as a member of the Library Foundation Board, I want to say that this conversation is paralleled and extended in a film that's going to be shown at the library, Ex Libris, Fred Wiseman's 3-hour sit-down in the New York Public Library, which I think speaks to issues of democracy and joy and inefficiency and humanity in just the ways that you all have been trying to draw our attention to them. So please come. It's going to be great. It is great.
When is it?
It's this month sometime. I don't know.
Okay.
18th?
The 18th of February in the Austin Public Library?
Yes.
All right.
Wonderful.
We always take a question from a gentleman wearing a two guys on your head T-shirt.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Got to represent. So I had a conversation with John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, about 17 years ago when they were designing the headquarters down on 6th Street. And one of the things that he said was really important to him was that with the evolution of technology, there was less of a need for people to come together socially to meet. And so typically what happened with information, the way that it was disseminated, was that it happened either in churches or at town hall meetings. And as technology evolved, there was less of a need for that to happen. So designing that store, what he wanted to do was to make it a very public place rather than simply a place that you would go and you would buy your groceries and you would leave and you would go home and so forth. My thought is that, A, he was spot on, but that as we become a wealthier nation, what our wealth buys us is privacy, in a way away from public meeting places and places where we share information. So while everybody here, I believe, has a great love of libraries, of the process of coming together and sharing information, as a former school teacher and as an observer of human beings, I feel as though we value that less as a society, and that very much has an effect on your question about how we get the public to or government to fund libraries. My question is, how do we get the public to reinvest in this sense of the importance and the value of coming together so that we have funding for libraries and so that we actually value the public experience as opposed to simply the private experience?
thank you.
Excellent.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Bravo.
Yeah.
It's kind of a long-winded question.
No.
Yeah, I know. It's an important one, and I think we tend not to emphasize the social aspects of the human experience. I think you're exactly right when you're talking about the idea of doing things privately, and you have just a few people you interact with, and the idea of interacting with people you don't know, and that could be weird, and what's that about? And Art has a great study that he talks about from time to time, and this may be one of those times, about having a conversation on the train study.
Oh yeah, we talked about that one.
Okay.
So I wrote about this. This is so it turns out, right? If you're commuting, so a guy named Nick Epley did this stuff. So if you're commuting, or if you get on an airplane, the thing you dread most is the prospect that someone's going to sit down next to you and start talking to you. And so we immediately put our headphones in and bury ourselves in something else so we don't have to engage with people. Because people's prediction is that that conversation is going to be absolutely horrible. And what Nick and his colleagues did was they took a bunch of people in the Chicago area who were about to get on the train, and they randomly assigned them. They said to some people, just do what you ordinarily do. And then other people were assigned to have a conversation with somebody on the commute. And then they had to report back on their commute. And what they found pretty systematically was those people who got on the train and had a conversation with a random stranger had a much better time, not just than they thought they were going to, but a much better time than the people who who got on the train to do what they normally did and weren't less productive, because most people get on the train with dreams that they're going to get all this work done and then they don't, right? And so that engagement turns out to have this powerful positive impact on people that they don't predict is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to couple that with a secondary piece, which is, I think a lot of people believe that the reason we experience so much political polarization in society now is because of the opportunity to choose your own media channels. And it turns out that may not actually be the case. So there's a great book that came out last year called Everybody Lies that is about using big data to answer questions. And one of the things that the author of that book found in looking at the media habits of people on the political right and left is that they actually consume the lion's share of their media from exactly the same sources. They are not as polarized in their media consumption as they are in their attitudes. So if it's not the consumption of media, what is it? And I would argue, on the basis of a lot of psychology data, that it's actually the lack of conversation that has more to do with it than anything else. Because one of the things we know from the psychology of conversation is that even if you have a discussion with somebody that you disagree with on the surface, when you leave that conversation, you actually think about the world more similarly to them than when you started. Because for one brief shining moment, you had to understand the world exactly like they do in order to be able to respond to what they said to you. And so conversation is a unifying force. And those conversations can't happen unless we end up in the same place at the same time. Yeah. And so one of the things that we should be doing is promoting these opportunities for people to engage in public, because that is the only thing that is going to get us out of the kind of tribalism that we're experiencing in our political world at the moment.
And you know, discourse in this country has gone down the toilet, so to speak. It's because we don't have those face-to-face conversations. You know, an emoji can't just tell you how you really feel. You know, the same as you being in the room with an individual. And it's sometimes, you know, I could feel their passion if I'm right there with them. Yeah. And so the social media thing has really gotten us to a point where we don't want to have that discourse. And some of the things that I would say in public, in front of you, I wouldn't, you know, I can say it on, you know, on social media. I can say, you stupid, you don't know what you're talking about. But if I'm with you in face to face, I wouldn't say that. Yeah. You know, so it tones that down a little bit. And I think libraries are a perfect place for that discourse, to get people to come and talk about their issues rather than tweeting about it or Instagramming about it, so to speak.
And I just say one more thing. See, you ask a long question, you get a long answer. So, so it pays. But you know, one of the things that allows for conversations is shared experience, right? I mean, if you see similar things or read similar things or hear similar things, well, now there's something to base a conversation on that wouldn't happen if I was in my place and you were in your place, and if we came together, we might not have experienced anything that's even similar, so there's no basis to even start a conversation. And I think, you know, sort of cycling back, as I see our time is almost up, is it being in places where there are opportunities to share experiences with other people whom you've never met before. But just the fact that you're sitting at a table or in a carrel or walking through the stacks with somebody, you don't know who they are, you don't know what their background is, there now is a shared experience with other human beings that may be very unlike the human beings that you typically associate with. That's an invaluable part of building a fabric of a society.
I just wanted to respond to that before we're going to wrap up here. But how many of you are in this building for the first time tonight? Wow. Many of you. And that was part of the reason why we wanted to collaborate and partner with the Library Foundation. First of all, thank you for your sponsorship, and with the Austin Public Library. And we look forward to strengthening that relationship so that we can strengthen the town-gown relations through conversation and dialogue like this. And it may not always be about libraries, but it could potentially be very difficult issues that we need to confront and talk. But opening up the space for dialogue, that's what libraries are about. So before I close up tonight, I have a few people to thank. First of all, Roosevelt, thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us here
Thank you.
tonight. Rebecca, thank you for coming in and keeping us on the narrow.
Semi on track.
Really appreciate you. Of course, our two guys on the head. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you. And last but not least, I'd like to thank the team in the advancement office. Natalie, where are you? Please stand up, all of you. Travis is at the back. Daniel is right over here. Logan is at the back. Jason, and where's Tao? It takes a lot to put a production together like this, and we are so delighted that you all thought this was a worthwhile program to support. I hope that we have given you enough to think about libraries tonight. We are so fortunate to be in a city like Austin, where the library is now on the radar. When the library opened, Mayor Adler spoke about it as the cathedral of Austin.
That's right.
This is the cathedral on the campus, in my view. And so we're going to bring the cathedrals together. This is Notre Dame now.
And that would make the two of you the bishops, since
On my head.
I'm worried about this metaphor.
But I hope that we can find more opportunities through a variety of programming, whether it's reading a book in the community or doing something during National Library Week in April, whatever it is. I hope we can find those opportunities. It does not make sense to have so many rich resources called libraries in a city like Austin, and we don't talk to each other.
That's right.
So with that, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. And is there anything else that I needed to say? Thank you, and enjoy your evening.